Hey YouTube, what is going on? Today we're going to talk about software startups and funding. How do we find funding? How do we get the financing off the ground? Why do we do it? And even more importantly, what are the ways that we can find funding so that we can get our company shooting to the atmosphere off a rocket ship, right? That's what we all want to know. If you're curious to know this and so much more, stay tuned because I have got a treat for you. All right, so let's jump right in. This is a huge question. How do we find the funding? What's the right way and wrong way, and how do we approach it? How do I get started? I'm starting my software company from the very get-go, and I need some funding to get off the ground. How do I do it? If we've never met before, my name is Wes Spencer. In this YouTube channel, you know what we're doing? We're helping anybody with all things innovative technology, whether that's blockchain, whether that's cybersecurity, whether that's software companies, or anything else that I find to be interesting. This is what we're going to talk about. Now, first of all, big question we've got to ask ourselves is, why does a company need financing, right? You may be talking to Uncle Joe and he's like, well, just get off your rear and do it, right? Just get started. And that can be common, right? If I'm going to go start a food truck, maybe I can just do that. If I'm going to go start something else that's not in software, oftentimes I can just go and try. I can work hard. Maybe I can save up a tiny little nest egg and get this thing going. But it's different in software. And it's not just software. This is other companies as well, but software is who I am. It's what I know, and it's what I've built. So why is this so important? So one huge key word you never can forget. If you're legitimate, that key word is this: growth. How do I get my company to grow? How do I make it that rocket ship that just takes off into the stratosphere like I mentioned before? Because see, the key driver to a young company that becomes successful, and I don't care which one you look at, from Facebook all the way through Microsoft, even in the early days, a good software company has a growth rate that expounds and expands past its current intake in revenue. In other words, we need to grow and outpace our growth quickly, way faster than what we could do on our own without funding. Now, first of all, let's talk about how that works without funding. So in the world of financing, we call this bootstrapping. Now, I personally know some startup CEOs who've bootstrapped their companies. There are a lot of right ways and there's a lot of reasons to bootstrap a company. When you bootstrap, you're saying, I'm doing this by myself. I'm either going to grow slowly and conservatively, which is very dangerous, or I have enough funding on my own that I can just make this thing work and I don't have to entertain investors. I don't have to go through funding rounds. I don't have to talk to investment banks, et cetera, et cetera. I can just do this on my own. Now, that is a nice luxury to have if you've got the capital on your own to get started. Now, who has that? Well, either rich people have that, or someone that has done this before and exited a company and has enough capital from that previous exit to be able to do this again without having to raise capital. Now, that is rare. You go look at any startup advice and they'll tell you bootstrapping is either A, really, really risky, or B, it is honestly pretty rare. It's hard to do. It's hard to be able to get there. Now, again, if you can bootstrap, power to you. But that is not what this video is about, because for us, bootstrapping is a challenge and it's a bear that we just typically don't have that luxury of having. Now, I do want to answer that question fully and finally of why young companies need to raise cash at the very beginning. And by the way, it's not just the very beginning, but it's also multiple iterative stages throughout your company's growth. You're going to need that capital injection to pivot, to grow the product, to expand to new areas that you've never been able to do before. But at the very beginning, why? Well, a key success criteria of a good software company that's just starting out is simply this: your ability to grow is outpaced by the capital you have in front of you. In other words, I've got to grow way quicker than the revenue that I'm bringing in at the very beginning. This is a key piece of a young software company, which is why successful young companies are built to grow fast. See, that need to burn capital is there to sustain the growth way before they ever get to profitability itself. That is the key driver of why these cash infusions are very, very important. So at the beginning, is there a right way to do it? Is there a wrong way to do it? How do I actually begin this fundraising? How do I start all of this? Well, there's a lot of ways you can do it. I can tell you experientially from me, I've done it in several different ways. Some are successful, some are much harder, and there are some right and wrong ways to do it. So if you're just now starting out, let's say you have a great idea for a software company, you're a founder, you've got this thing off the ground, you've watched my last video where we talked about how we actually begin at the very beginning concept stages. What do you do next? Do you go after some kind of venture capital and you start talking to them and hope you can get in the doors and speak to them? I'm telling you, in all likelihood, if you try that approach, if you have no street cred, if you have no history in terms of being known in the market, you're going to struggle with that. They're typically not at the earliest stage going to find interest in you and your company as a venture capitalist firm. Now, why is that? That's because VC firms are not usually looking at that early stage of investment. We call that a seed round, the very beginning that you kind of take it off. And I love that idea of a seed and sort of growing, right? And you plant it and the seed grows into a seedling and then eventually into the full plant or tree, whatever it's going to be. That's the idea here. And VCs are not looking for that. VCs are looking for those saplings, to use the tree analogy. They're looking for somebody that's been down this road a little bit further, maybe already has product market fit, or maybe is got some amount of revenue coming in, and they're all going to have their own key stringent requirements that they're looking at. So let's throw that one out altogether. VCs are a very poor choice for seed funding. What are some other ways you can do it? Well, one way is what's called angel investors. If you've never heard of an angel investor, there is a difference between angel investors and VCs. See, angel investors are usually people that have their own money, that can spend it how they want, when they want, in the ways that they want. They can make and decide things much quicker. They don't usually have the hindrances that others have, that VCs have, because it's just their own money. Now, here's what's good and here's what's bad about angel investors. What's bad? Let's start there first. So first of all, angel investors are usually not pros. Oftentimes, angel investors are local to you, and angel investors are simply looking for what their gut check and what they think feels like a good company. They may be using prior history and prior experience. It may just be literally finger in the wind, just kind of feeling it out and say, I feel like I like this person. I think they're smart. I'm going to give them some money. You never know with an angel investor unless you've worked with them before, you have references of what they're going to be like, what their capabilities are, their understanding of the market. And sometimes angel investors can act in unprofessional ways in terms of getting all up in your business and wrecking your growth because they don't understand who you are or what your company is. Now, that does not always happen. If you vet out a really good angel investor, they should be there to help you along the early stages of the way. A key criteria that I look for in some kind of angel is, have they done this before? Do they understand some amount of the market? And what can they do on top of just giving me some early funding? How can they really get me going on a trajectory that I need? A good angel should be able to start in some of those things. And they might even have some resources they can help you with. Maybe they allow you to co-work and use some of their location space so you've had a place to work and build. Maybe they have some key contacts locally that can help you test your product and get it going. There's a lot of things angels can do that help. Let's go back to the negatives again, though, because I kind of slipped away from it. Another big negative is sometimes angels don't understand your valuation. And if you don't understand it yourself and they're going for an equity play and that early funding, that angel can sometimes take too much and completely wreck the company. I've seen that happen, and that is not a good thing. Now, in this video, we're not going to talk about equity percentages and early seed stage valuation. It really just comes down to this at this stage. If you don't have a ton of revenue, your valuation itself is kind of, again, finger in the wind. It's kind of based on what we think the total addressable market is, your past history, what their understanding, their hunger and appetite to invest in you is. And ultimately, if you have the luxury of having multiple angel investors coming after you and saying, hey, I would love to get on this. I would love to invest as well. There's good in that because then they play off each other, and ultimately you're probably going to take the investor you're the most happy with, but also realistically those that are giving you the highest valuation. So those are some of the negatives about angels. They're typically not professionals. They work off opportunities when they get them. Many times they go off gut feel. They don't answer to like a higher authority like a VC would for those that are pooling their funding together. This is one of the problems that you run into with angels, is all of those kinds of things mixed together. Now, there are benefits, and there's a lot of benefits, especially for a seed company. When you are first creating your company, here's the challenge. How do you find somebody that's going to listen to you? How do you find somebody that's going to really get your idea off the ground? This is where, in my experience, angels have been the key to unlocking early success. Now, hear me. One of the key criteria, if you're going to look for angels, is look for those that are local to you. For example, if you live in Nashville, Tennessee, go look for local Nashville-based investors that love to do those angel seed funding rounds locally. You're going to have way more luck, and there's a lot of reasons for that. One is, chances are you're going to know people that know them, and those things can help you with character references and backgrounds and that sort of thing. But also, locals just love to invest in locals. It's just a key criteria that we see for success often. But you've got to be prepared when you're talking to seed investors. Be prepared for failure. Be prepared those first 3, 4, 5, 10, 20 times you do those pitches for those pitches to fall flat. They're either going to ask you questions you don't have the answer to, they're going to ask you things that you just don't like, you're going to get defensive, you're going to stumble around, or ultimately they just don't like the answer even if it's the right answer. That happens a lot. Remember what I said, angels are really operating off of what they feel like is the key to success, the things that have worked for them before, the markets that they like, the styles that they like, and if nothing else, just literally first impression of you. Whether they like you as an investor, if they feel confident in what you are doing. I've seen some angels invest for no other reason other than they said after it was done, he just seemed smart. She just seemed really likable and charismatic and smart, and that's why I liked her. That does happen. So be prepared for a lot of failures as you're going through the original initial seed funding rounds. But what's great about the locals, when they like you, when they get you going, they do provide some of those key things that you need. I remember in some of the companies that we founded in the early days, we just didn't have resources for things like some of the legal things that needed to happen early on, accounting and HR. And we didn't even have a huddle room for us to work out of when we were kind of incubating the ideas and originally doing design planning for the company itself. Those are things that angels are really good at. Our angels said, hey, we've got space for you. Hey, if you need a few hours from my accountant to do XYZ, I've got them for you. Feel free to shoot them a message and I'd be happy for them to work with you. Those are things that angels are really good at. And that's why I love and recommend for young companies is option 1, find and work with an angel that's local to you. So here's the second way that it can be done. You can go to a bank. Now, I have very little to say about this because typically it's not met with success. While you can find some banks that understand and can structure debt for you in a way that will work for you to get off the ground, that's usually not the way most of us go. So I'm going to throw banks out the window. Even investment banks, they're usually looking to meet and set you up with some kind of buyer that they can help you with the financing and the strategy and the valuation. But typically banks themselves at the very early stage of funding, when you're going for the seed, poor choice. So let's just throw that out altogether. What's the third way? A third way is interesting. I don't know if you've ever heard of Y Combinator, but startup accelerators, of which Y Combinator is the most popular, these have a lot of benefits. In fact, history has shown that these startup accelerators can do some things that you just can't typically get going on your own, especially if you're a first-time software founder. And especially if this is the first time you've ever worked in founding a company of any kind or ever been in the world of software and technology, these startup accelerators can be really nice. Now, there are some very well-known household names that are accelerators. Like I mentioned, Y Combinator is one, but another good example is Imagine in K-12. Now, some of these really well-known startup accelerators are awesome because they've done this before over and over and over, and they have a very rigorous process to them. And that process includes you working with them on site. That process is usually a squeezed time frame in which they're injecting all of this knowledge in you on how to successfully, at least typically successfully, route your company to success. And again, as a new founder, if you've never done this before, there are keys to success and milestones that you have to learn. And there's a few ways you can do it. One is trial and error and failure. And by the way, that's usually been my experience. Or learning from others that have done this before and they've done it successfully, and you can look at and learn from their own paths to success. And that is a great way to go, simply because the accelerator itself is doing just that. It's accelerating you. The normal pathway that might take you 1 to 2 years to truly understand how to build the product, how to assemble a team, how to go to product market fit, how to truly understand your total addressable market and really truly very accurately and acutely build your product towards that direction. Those are things that accelerators are really good at. And those are things you can trust. And accelerators will usually bring previous founders or current founders of companies that have been through this before. And as they're looking through your ideas and how you're going and you're working together, they're going to give you those points along the way. And so here's the way I like to look at a startup accelerator. They take the entire time to make a company great and to go from the very small beginning stages all the way into some kind of successful product market fit that might take a full year or sometimes even in some cases 2 years, and squeeze that down to, man, I don't know, sometimes a few months, 6 months, a year itself at the longest. That's the great example of what an accelerator does for you. It just does that. It accelerates. Now, there are some disadvantages to accelerators. One is this: the good accelerators, the household name accelerators that are out there, are hard to get into. You have to apply. There's a lot of others that you're competing with to be able to get in. I mean, that's just the nature of supply and demand at its basic essence. Now, there are local accelerators. I've personally seen some in the locations that I've lived in, and they are of dubious quality. And what I mean by that is this: some of them are really good. Some of them are true pretenders. Oftentimes, if you've done this a few times before, you can sniff out the true pretenders. Look at who's exited from there. Look at how many have successfully either done an IPO or some kind of acquisition. Look at that. That should be key criteria in looking into the background. Look who runs the accelerators. Have they done this multiple times before? Is there a crew of folks that are running the accelerator that truly have been on this path to success? If they're a bunch of academics, if they're a bunch of people that have just been working in enterprise and have never actually done this, don't listen to them. That is a clear sign, in my experience at least, and maybe yours differs, but that is an accelerator that you should not put your time and effort into. Because here's the danger of an accelerator. If you follow them in every single direction they give you and they're giving you bad advice, not only does it wreck your current trajectory and pathway, it's going to take you exponentially longer to recover from that. And unfortunately, in some cases, you may never recover from that. And that's not good. Nobody wants that to happen, right? That is not a good process for us to follow. So startup accelerators, I'm a huge fan of. You just got to make sure if you're getting involved in one, that it's a good one, that they understand the market, they understand you, and they can truly do what they're promising to do in the name, which is accelerate your growth and get you going much quicker than normal. Now, funding does exist in accelerators. Most of the accelerators, and Y Combinator is a great example of this, is they don't actually do equity investments at the seed round early on. See, many seed investors like the angels oftentimes still will do some kind of equity at the very beginning. They're going to say something like, hey, look, we're going to give you X amount of money at this valuation and we want 20% of the company. That still happens. In the good combinators, that actually doesn't happen, and they work off what's called convertible notes. Now, you may not know what a convertible debt or a convertible note is all about. If you've watched Shark Tank, you've seen this pitched oftentimes, and usually it's poo-pooed, which I think is not always the right and smart and wise choice. They do have disadvantages, but they're usually structured. A good convertible debt is usually structured to be founder friendly. What's great about Y Combinator is they're pretty open in their processes because they're really invested in seeing anybody take off as a startup. And so you don't have to be just in their system. And Y Combinator Combinator has a good structure of a convertible debt pathway that you can use and follow. And that can really help when you're looking at some kind of seed investor that's not doing a direct equity play for that funding round. You can take Y Combinator's example, and I'll show you a link down below in the description if you want to see how it works. But you can follow that pathway just to make sure that you're setting up and structuring in a way that's not going to get you in the end. Now, let me also say this, you should consult with legal. If you're going to go into structured debt or even really any kind of financing at all, it's good to have some kind of legal personnel look it over just to make sure there's no gotchas that exist in there, because there can be things that really will wreck it. You want to make sure you avoid those things. This video is not going to do that. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not your legal counsel. I'm not trying to do those things, right? But make sure that you do account for that when you start getting ready to sign the end paper to get that investment round going. So let's go back to the convertible debt itself. Why is that advantageous? So let's talk about this. Usually a convertible debt is some kind of loan that your investor makes to you through an instrument called a convertible note. Now, here's what's good about a convertible note. A convertible note usually includes some kind of principal, which is the amount of the loan. It's also going to include the interest rate. It might be something, and it needs to be something low, like for example, 2%. But the key thing is this. It converts at some point into equity. So it's not initially an equity play, but because it's a convertible debt, that means what? It converts into something else, and usually that conversion is into equity. And here's why convertible notes are nice. For the investor that's giving out that loan, they have some kind of future end goal in mind, the ability to convert that into equity at a later stage. There's usually caps that exist for them, and those caps say this is the maximum, amount that I'm going to have to pay in order for that to convert over, and here's the rate that it's going to convert over to at that valuation. And if you're first starting out and you're thinking, whoa, that sounds a little unfair, so I could just grow like crazy, and then all of a sudden that investor gets to convert at a lower rate that somebody else would at the true valuation. Well, yeah, and here's why. Remember, that investor shouldered a bunch of risk in going for you. Was your company going to succeed? Maybe, maybe not. They shouldered that early risk. And this is where angels love to invest, and this is where convertible notes from accelerators, this is where it is skewed somewhat towards them because they're taking a lot of risk. If you look at the data on failed companies, many more companies fail at the earliest stages than succeed. So it may take them investing in 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different companies to just see one that is carried through into some kind of acquisition or IPO. That's a pretty high failure rate. And so they're shouldering that risk for you, and the benefits they get out of that are simply that they can simply make sure that they have the ability to convert into equity at a future time that's advantageous to them. Now, what's advantageous to you as the founder? Well, it's simply this. You're getting great funding at an early stage, and you're not losing equity at the early beginnings of this, and chances are it's not going to be as much equity you lose at the very beginning, right? Because you are doing this after the fact, and it is having some kind of cap for the investor. So I don't know how much all of that makes sense, but just know this, what's very, very common is convertible debt that does happen at the early stages of your company. And there's some great ways to do it, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel to understand this. Check out Y Combinator. You can see some of their structured examples of how they typically like to do it. And they actually don't break out of that box at all. They typically very commonly go with that kind of structured debt over and over. And what the things that may be negotiable, what the caps are, what the maturity rates are, the ability to extend the maturity, those are different things that you may see. But the actual structure of the convertible debt itself usually stays the same. And the last funding source I want to talk about is crowdfunding. I mentioned crowdfunding a little bit in my last video. Most of you know what crowdfunding is all about. In my experience, crowdfunding is really good for consumer tech, but you can sometimes see it be successful in business to business or enterprise focused. And here's why it's really nice for consumer tech. Sometimes in the world of consumer tech, we can't actually understand the demand. We think we might know what the demand is, or we may have no idea what the demand is. We know we have a problem to solve, but is there demand for that problem? And here's what's great about crowdfunding. Crowdfunding can actually answer that demand question. We put a great early product out there that we think is going to be really useful and interesting, and you want to get some crowdfunding to go behind it. Now, there's awesome advantages of crowdfunding. One advantage of crowdfunding is simply this right here. You don't usually, maybe never, lose equity in crowdfunding. So you get a bunch of folks that say, I'm interested in this, I want to buy in early, and they get benefits. Maybe they pay something cheaper. Maybe you have some kind of monthly reoccurring revenue that comes out of it. They pay once for a year and they get it forever as like a super early investor in the company, but you're not losing equity. That's really, really nice. And there's no structured debt behind it either that would cause you to lose equity at the maturation when that debt closes. And so that's really nice. It really helps you grow. The second thing that it does is it lets you really demonstrate to the market what the demand is. You see, in the startup world, we always talk about TAM, or total addressable market. What is the full market buying potential? We might say, hey, this thing that I'm doing, this is a $2 billion industry. Sometimes we don't know what that is, and sometimes you and an investor may disagree. Crowdfunding is a great way to say, hey, we did a crowdfund a long time ago and we raised $400,000 in a month. That is really, really pretty amazing. There's some metrics inside crowdfunding that help us measure and understand what TAM is. And that is a huge advantage of crowdfunding. It's a great way in some cases to get your company off the ground. Sometimes you might do some kind of crowdfunding in the middle of funding stages, just so you can show to future investors that there is a TAM that's really big and there is a lot of demand behind what you're doing. And in some cases, that funding is enough through crowdfunding to get you through to the next stage. Maybe you raise a full $1 million and that's what you needed to get through. Now, what we're not going to cover in this video is some additional things around how much funding do I need to raise? How do I actually understand valuation? What is my company worth? And how do I calculate valuation? And how do I negotiate through that? We're not going to cover those things in this video, but what I'd love to know from you, if this is interesting and it's helping you and you're an early stage founder, you're thinking about getting into this and you want to know more about those kinds of things and how I get valuation and how I negotiate through those processes, all you got to do is leave a comment down below. That will help me understand, hey, this was useful for you. You want more around this. And without doubt, I'll produce some more videos around this. But what I really wanted to do is stick to those main things. The first thing being, how do I find funding? The second thing, or what are the advantages and disadvantages to those funding options? Because that's really what we need to know when we're starting that company. And once you know these secrets to success, you'll find that funding is possible. It's still going to come with really, really hard work. And there are things you have to do on top of this. A pitch deck is also really helpful. And in this video, we're not going to talk about a pitch deck, but again, leave me a comment if you want to know more. But these are the things that I think are critical when we're starting the business to finding that funding, whether we're going with an angel, whether going with an accelerator, or with some kind of bank financing inside of that, or a convertible note, or whatever that may be. There are ways that you can get there, and never, ever, ever take, oh, I couldn't find funding as an excuse. Typically, it means one of two problems. Problem one, you're not trying hard enough. Problem two, the product, what you're trying to address, there's a problem inside all of that. It's not a big enough problem, there's not an addressable market, or you are not doing a good enough job explaining and defending why it's so important. I hope this video is helpful for you. Give me some feedback down below. I am watching for comments. I answer comments. I want to know back from you. Was this helpful? What else would you like to know around starting your company? And the last thing you can do for me that would be super helpful, you hit that subscribe button, like it, smash it, mash it. That will help grow my subscriber account. I'm really excited to continue to give you more videos. Let me know your thoughts. I can't wait to hear more. Thanks.